Dark Souls is a game that, to me, fundamentally encourages exploration. Its interconnected level design, along with its boss fights, kept me thoroughly engaged throughout my entire experience playing the game. I mean, seriously, I felt neurons firing in my head that have never been used before. But in this video, instead of talking about its brilliant game design, I want to speak on its lore and how it relates to the theology of Buddhism. Dark Souls has an incredibly obscure and enigmatic way of dispersing its lore, through its item descriptions, vague dialogue, and sparse but poignant cutscenes. The more I played this game, the less I felt I knew about the lore. But thankfully we have channels like VatiVidya. They break down the lore in terms that someone like me with 2 brain cells glued together can understand. And the more I learned about Dark Souls' lore, the more I could relate its own themes to my religion, Buddhism. And I don't want to be that guy that just inserts their own religion to every piece of media on this planet, but there were a lot of similarities that I just want to go over, so let's get into it. The world of Dark Souls is a world of cycles. Life and death, fire and ash. These concepts go hand in hand. Prior to the events of the first game, there was an age of the ancients. Giant stone dragons roamed the world, in relative peace and harmony. That is until the first flame ignited, and gave birth to all new beings. 3 beings in particular would be granted 3 Lord Souls from the flame. Nido, the Lord of Death, the Witch of Izalith, the Lord of Life, and now Chaos, which at times go hand in hand. And most importantly, Gwyn, the Lord of Light. And there's one other being that claimed a soul from the fire. The furtive pygmy.
So easily forgotten.
Who discovered the Dark Soul, which bestowed humanity to the human-like beings of the world. Gwyn and the army that he commanded, along with the other lords, would then go on to wage a war against the ancient dragons, exterminating them completely. He then established his kingdom in Lordran and took his place as Lord, beginning his Age of Fire, bringing an end to the Age of Ancients. So how does this relate to Buddhism? One of the main tenets of Buddhism is that nothing will last forever, and everything is impermanent. This same concept applies to the first flame as well, as it started to die out in the midst of Gwyn's Age of Fire. Gwyn and his desire for his power and influence to last forever commits what's now known as the first sin by using himself and his powerful soul as cinder to link the flame and keep the Age of Fire going longer. The term Dhamma in Buddhism refers to the natural order or universal laws of the universe. It means that to uphold these laws is a fundamental aspect of Buddhism. This could explain why Gwyn linking the first flame is the first sin, because he disrupted the natural order of the world, which in turn upset its balance. The first flame itself is impermanent. It was meant to give birth to new life and subsequently die out, which would have been its natural progression had Gwyn not stopped it. And by the time of Dark Souls 1, the flame is once again fading and it's up to you to link it again, giving you the choice to continue the cycle or end it. Many think that the link the fire ending is the good ending, but I'd argue that to keep the flame alive is to keep the cycle of suffering alive. And we can see the toll that takes on the world by the time of Dark Souls 3. At this point, countless kingdoms have risen, countless have fallen, and all are laden in suffrage. Another core concept in Buddhism is Samsara. Its direct translation from Sanskrit means world. In Buddhism, Samsara is the suffrage-laden cycle of death and rebirth, also known as the Wheel of Existence. This concept is one that I see throughout Dark Souls. The world itself is cyclical in nature, with kingdoms being born, destroyed, reborn again over and over. In Buddhism, that unending cycle of suffrage and life, followed by death and rebirth, is one that's kind of viewed as a curse in a way. Nirvana is achieved through breaking this cycle, and I'll explain how later. So, does that unending cycle of death and rebirth sound familiar? Yeah, it's literally the curse of the undead. Like almost everything in Dark Souls' lore, it's not explained where or why the curse of the undead came into existence. My personal headcanon is that it's from Gwyn's unnatural continuation of the first flame that the curse of the undead came into existence. It kind of acts as a counterforce to the unbalance that was created. As the flame begins to die out, more and more humans who bear the Dark Soul become afflicted with the Dark Sign, a ring of fire that surrounds and slowly burns away their Dark Soul, and in turn, their humanity. This dark sign is what causes the curse of the undead. The curse causes those afflicted to resurrect upon death indefinitely. Each time one dies and comes back to life, they slowly lose their mind and sense of selves until they fully go mad. This is called hollowing. These undead are cursed to a life of suffrage, death, and rebirth indefinitely, which is very similar to that concept of samsara. Dukkha is another fundamental concept of Buddhism. It roughly translates to pain or suffering, and it's positioned as the underpinning of all life. Suffering exists everywhere in our world, from disaster, disease, and death. And not to mention fighting Melania. God damn it, she's hard. I can't Anyway, Dukkha goes hand in hand with another concept, Tanha. Tanha means desire, thirst, or craving. The idea is that Tanha is one of the main causes of Dukkha. Desire leads to suffering. You want that Bugatti, but you can't have it. You want that PS5, but there are only like 3 in existence, and so on. Even if you get what you want, you'll still want more, and that in turn causes suffering. The ancient dragon from Dark Souls 2 summarizes these concepts very well. Suffering and the craving that leads to suffering is exemplified by the NPCs you meet throughout your journey. Solaire craves his light and is driven mad searching for it. Sigmair's desire is to become a great champion, and he either ends up dead or disappointed in himself for not living up to those expectations. So far I've described the first 2 of the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. The first being that life is dukkha or suffering. The second is the cause of suffering being tanha, craving and desire. The third truth is to acknowledge that just like all things are impermanent, so is suffering. Through enlightenment, one can end the cycle of suffering and achieve nirvana. I'm not the first one to discuss the parallels between Dark Souls and Buddhism. Many people online have discussed this, and some of the conclusions about nirvana are very interesting. People call the Age of Dark ending attaining nirvana, as it could be a means of ending the cycle of life and death caused by the continuation of the first flame. Another take I've seen is that to go hollow is to attain nirvana, which is also interesting. Many Buddhist teachings suggest that to attain nirvana is to dispel attachment from all earthly things and desires, which does happen when someone goes hollow, but does this really look like the end of suffering to you? To me it looks like the opposite. Not to mention hollows still go through samsara, the endless cycle of death and rebirth, which is supposed to end when someone achieves nirvana. The fourth noble truth in Buddhism is that to achieve nirvana, one should follow the eightfold path. Essentially, it's to strike a balance with 8 different aspects of life. So is there any character who has achieved nirvana in Dark Souls? Yes, it was the ancient stone dragons, dude. They were completely neutral in all thought and actions. They were literally just vibing until Gwyn had to come along and fuck it all up. So yeah, I believe the Age of Dark ending is the best ending, as it puts an end to the unnatural cycle of keeping the flame alive, which would in turn end all desires. It's time to reject modernity and embrace tradition, which in this case are giant stone dragons. Thanks for watching.